The law was almost 3,000 pages long, and it touched everything. It touched the individuals, the insurance carriers, businesses, doctors on how they practice. There are taxes and penalties throughout the entire law. So there's this tax on individuals. There are 3 different taxes levied on the insurance carrier. There are taxes on durable medical equipment, taxes on hospitals. So there are ways they're paying for all of this. Penalties to the employer if they don't offer the insurance. So the law is huge, and that's why I'm always happy to show up and talk about it, but it can go. Yeah.
Well, you said it was 3,000 pages but then... About
3,000, but then
what is it now? Because now I heard it was thousands upon thousands.
Yeah, because you take a law, our Secretary of Health, the Department of Health and Human Services, has to take that law and then interpret it into the rules. So I've heard different estimates. I've heard 10,000 pages. I've heard higher than that. And again, for everybody who's a part of the industry, employers, insurance carriers, hospitals and doctors, they have to interpret their piece of this law and rules, how it affects them. And then they have to understand, okay, well, here's a federal law, but then I have to work in this state. What are the state laws? Do they conflict?
It is, yeah. So is the state? Let me back up. What concerns me the most, I would say, about the entirety of the law is it says throughout all those 3,000 pages, as the secretary deems fit. So all this control is given solely to one person, the secretary. However, that secretary is right, and actually gets their authority from the president.
Correct.
So everything in that law, in the 3,000 pages, the president is in control over everything, one single man.
It would appear so. I mean, it's a law passed by Congress, right? Passed by both houses and then signed into law by the president. You would think that to make any significant changes to that, you'd have to go back to Congress, but we haven't seen that. We've seen deadlines pushed. We've seen...
well, because how the law was written, they don't have to. Nobody saw the law before they voted on it. And the law automatically gave the president control over each and every person through the secretary.
Yeah. And I'll give you an example of how the secretary has been able to make a change. One of that list of 10 essential benefits, I mentioned preventative health care.
Okay.
Preventative health care is supposed to be covered at 100%. There's no copay involved, there's no deductible. It started off as a list of services and exams. Well, that within less than a year, I believe, of the law passing, the Department of Health and Human Services added to that list. So if you have a list of services that insurance carriers are required to cover at 100%, regardless, and then you add to that list, the insurance carriers have no authority or power over that. They now have to cover it. So things that were added to the list: birth control, breast pumps and teaching of how to use breast pumps, sterilizations. When you're talking about a sterilization for a female, that's not a cheap procedure. And now an insurance carrier has to pay for that in full. So there could be people thinking, this is great. I get my exams for free, I get my birth control for free, but I want you to understand that nothing is free. So if an insurance carrier has to cover services and can't charge you a cost share for it, they have to bring up the price of the premium for everybody involved. So every time the government adds something in to the coverage, we want you to cover this. We want you to give this service for free. We want you to cap exposure. We want you to insure everybody, regardless of their health history or pre-existing conditions, immediately. All of that has a cost associated to it. And that gets lumped on to the premium.
Yeah, since the IRS is involved, and we know... Well, they will be. They're not yet.
Well, because the first year that you're required to have insurance is 2014. So we're all kind of waiting with bated breath to see what this is going to look like at the end of the year, because I'm very curious. I've actually started asking tax consultants who have no answers yet, how will this look on our tax return? What type of proof are we going to have to provide to show the government that we had insurance so that we don't have this penalty? Is it a box that we check? What if you're doing TurboTax? If you're going to a tax preparer, do you have to show them a certificate of credible coverage from an insurance carrier? How are we going how are we going to police this? And I've not found a tax person yet that has any definitive answers on that. They're still focused on, of course, getting through 2013.
Okay, and so I don't know that you can answer this question, but, with how we know how much the IRS loves conservative groups, which, just in case people don't watch
The news.
the alternative news source, the IRS targeted conservative groups, and the promise to look into this, terrible unlawful act was never followed through on.
Right.
And really, it's because Obama doesn't like conservative groups either. I mean, that's pretty clear. But is there any way that the IRS will be able to taint their coverage towards different?
I have no idea. I mean, because again, we don't even know how they're going to go about policing this. What kind of proof are you going to have to provide? And it isn't just the consumer trying to prove that they have insurance. They're in the law, they're becoming more stringent on employers. So any employer of any size who offers any kind of a health plan, that could be a dental insurance plan, that could be a medical plan, that could be a flexible spending account. There's ERISA loss. And so now the Department of Labor is actually going after and doing even more audits. In fact, they've hired, I think it is something like 2,000 more people. The IRS are hiring more auditors.
Wow.
So they're ramping up to be able to police all these things that the law has given them the ability to police.
Wow,
And the
that's
thing
scary.
the thing that people need to understand, because we're really coming down to the wire, the deadline to get insurance in place right now, unless the government or the president changes his mind, is April 1st. And I say that because everything's been changing.
Yeah.
So we had this open enrollment period. It started October 1. It's going to close by March 31st. During that 6 months, it was longer than normal, than it normally will be, because it was the first one. Anybody can go buy insurance on the individual market. There is no medical questions asked. They don't look at your medical records. They cannot exclude any pre-existing conditions. So you can walk in the door with cancer, with a brain tumor, and have it operated the next week. I actually know that because I had a client who went through that. So during this open enrollment period, if you don't already have it coming from a government agency or your employer, you're going to need to get insurance. For all those people who don't get it and have it effective by the end of this open enrollment, that's when you're going to have to face that tax penalty. They gave everybody until April 1st to get a plan in place. At the end of the year, if you can't prove that you've had insurance, you'll face a penalty. What's more important is people need to understand this isn't something that you can just go buy whenever you feel like it. When we talk about these open enrollment periods, this is a specific time that you can go buy insurance. The carriers will not be selling insurance, and neither will Cover Oregon, outside of that time frame until next year, so the fall of this coming year, for a 2015 effective date.
Really?
Unless you have a life-changing event. Maybe you lose group coverage. Your COBRA is exhausted. There was a death. There was a birth. There was a marriage.
How about if somebody gets cancer in that time period? Okay.
So unless you have a life-changing event, you've moved, you've lost group coverage. I mean, again, these are very specific, finite reasons. You will not be able to buy insurance during that time period.
That's interesting to know.
Right.
Okay, so if somebody they're not happy with this and they just ignore it, they'll only have to pay $95 at the
They will have to
end of
pay
year.
95 or 1% of their
Or
gross
or
income,
1%.
whichever is greater.
Yeah.
So I want people to stop thinking $95. I want you to think 1% of my gross income.
Yeah, you can see how that's been drilled in my head. I just can't
so
seem to
1%,
quit saying
because
it.
everybody says that. Oh, it's just $95. It's 1% of your gross income.